Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the Answer Company. The Division Championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Sheridan Dulas & Kins, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009, Sheridan Dulas & Kins are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello, I'm Steve Francisco. Welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. It's a real pleasure to welcome to our program today a new guest on our program. His name is Scott Elkins. Scott is the executive director of a nonprofit organization called the Land Stewardship Project, LSP for short. Scott, welcome to Access to Democracy.
Thanks, Steve. I'm really glad to be here.
So you didn't grow up in Minnesota, as I understand it. Tell us about your background, where you came from, and how you ended up in Minnesota.
Sure. Well, I'm a seventh-generation Texan, both sides of my family going back for a long way. Grew up outside of Dallas in the suburb, although both my grandparents and parents also did some cattle ranching. I moved up here in 1990 for graduate school. Got caught up in a crowd of advocates and organizers, left there in 1992, and have been pursuing advocacy and progressive work ever since then.
And your current position as executive director of the Land Stewardship Project, how long have you been doing that?
Just a little over a year now, although it's my second tenure at Land Stewardship Project. I worked there as an organizer for a couple of years in the mid-90s as well.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's great, yeah. And I have some familiarity with your organization, as I mentioned it before we came into the studio today. When I was doing federal policy work back in the early 2000s, I used to work with people from the Land Stewardship Project. Great organization. So you're a 501c3 nonprofit organization?
We are, and we also have a 501c4 advocacy arm called Land Stewardship Action that works in some get out the vote in electoral areas as well.
So give our viewers a little better understanding, a more thorough understanding. What is the Land Stewardship Project and what is your mission? What's your organization's mission?
Well, Land Stewardship is a really fantastic group that focuses on rural communities, farming, small and mid-sized farmers, and food safety. So we've been doing this work for 43 years now. Started off in southeastern Minnesota during the time of the farm crisis, with a real emphasis on bringing together the issue of sustainable living, sustainable practices in farming and for farmers.
And approximately how many people are on your staff?
We've got about 28 folks on staff now, and they're based in 3 different offices. We've got one office in Minneapolis, another in Lewiston in southeastern Minnesota, and then Montevideo in west central Minnesota.
So a statewide organization. And how many member households do you have?
About 4,000, and yeah, statewide, but a real focus on the rural areas of the state. We look to our farming members and our rural resident members as sort of the core gravity of the work that we do.
LSP actually reaches beyond rural areas. You have members in the Twin Cities metro area, in the core cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and even in suburban communities like here in Egan and Dakota County. Tell us why you think that's important to have this reach beyond just farmers, because that makes your organization, as an agricultural organization, you're more than that. You're not just dealing with the people in the rural areas, but making this urban, rural, suburban connection.
Well, I think it's a great example of the way issue of food and agriculture cuts across a lot of different divides. While our emphasis and our focus is really on the needs and the interests around farming and rural communities, people in urban and suburban areas rely on those places for their food. And they understand...
We're the consumers, yeah. Well,
Right.
We're all consumers of the food. Yeah.
They understand the connections between those two different pieces. And a lot of our members, particularly urban and suburban, place a lot of value on the integrity of their food, knowing where it comes from, and even having a personal relationship with the folks who are growing their food.
Are you seeing your membership increase? People becoming more concerned about issues like, where does my food come from? How is it grown? What types of fertilizers may be used in the products, or pesticides that are used in particular products?
There's a tremendous growth of interest in the area of ag and food. And I think it really has to do with people just giving a careful eye to what's going on in the world, thinking about the increased corporatization of agriculture and a lot of other sectors, and really looking for authenticity in their lives, including where their food comes from.
I wanted to ask you about that, Scott. I believe most people realize that Minnesota is a very important agricultural state in our country. We're one of the most important. I believe we're near the top in things like corn and soybean production. I believe we are the top in turkey production, much of it in southwestern Minnesota around Worthington. So that makes agriculture important to Minnesota's overall economy too. How many people have had to leave the family farm? In other words, I guess I'm wondering, do you know what percentage of family farms are still left in Minnesota, and what proportion of farms are, shall we say, corporate farms?
Well, the trajectory has been really clear and really consistent for decades now, which is we have fewer and fewer farmers on the land and larger individual farms. We think of it as corporate consolidation, where while a lot of these farms may be family-based, they sit in a network of contracts, and they sit in a network of large corporate interests that really control the way in which they produce food, the kind of food they produce, all the details of that sort of production. For a lot of farmers nowadays, there's not a lot of active agency in the way they care for their land. Our members, on the other hand, are really focused on sort of pushing against that tide and really being the ethic of stewardship to their land, and a lot of care about both the way they produce food, how they're getting it out to consumers, and building that consumer-farmer connection.
Say a little bit more, if you would, Scott, about this relationship between the remaining family farmers and large agricultural corporations. How does that work exactly? Is it they have exclusive contracts with particular farmers to send them, say, if it's a dairy farm, all of their milk production or all of their eggs or crop production? We're going to send Green Giant all of our green beans to Le Sueur. Is that what's happening?
I would say even more complicated than that. So everything from the seeds that are planted in the ground to when and what kind of fertilizer a farmer applies, to pesticide and herbicide application, to when it's produced, to the cost they're paid or the price they're paid for their crop. All of these aspects are controlled by that sort of corporate infrastructure that holds farming in its grasp. For a lot of our members who, many of them own land, some of them lease land, the idea of having a greater sense of connection to the practices that they're deploying on their farm and the people who are consuming their food, it's super important to them. So sitting outside of that corporate structure is something that they take a lot of pride in, but it's increasingly difficult, both as prices constrain them and as markets get captured more and more fully by those corporate interests.
Right. And this linkage between what's happening on farms in Minnesota and what's happening on the consumer end, you know, you and I were talking, everybody knows this, that the price of groceries has gone up significantly in recent times. We all see it every time we go to the grocery store. And we've also noticed that certain products, portions are smaller, but the price is the same. So with this steep increase in the cost of groceries at the store, are the farmers getting most of that increase? I suspect not. Can you tell us, where is that money going that we're all paying out when we go to the grocery store?
Right. So the way to think about it is that relationship between farmer and consumer. If you go to the farmer's market and you're purchasing a product by the farmer, then every dollar that you're giving is going to that farmer's pocket to pay their direct costs and that they can carry back to the farm. As corporations get involved, they get in between that consumer and producer relationship. And the nature of corporations is they want their profits and their balance sheets to grow. And so they start pushing on either side. They start reducing the prices they pay to farmers, and they start increasing the amount they get from the consumer. And then they take more and more and a greater and greater proportion of that. So a lot of farmers right now are struggling pretty intensely as commodity prices decrease, as those corporations take a bigger and bigger bite of all of the money that's coming in. And on the consumer side, they feel it as an increase in prices, but that translation from consumer to producer, particularly when you're talking about processed things that you'll see on the grocery store aisle, there's very little connection between those two things anymore.
So I think we all understand, hopefully, how markets work, that markets go up, markets go down. Sometimes there's good yield or particular crops, you know, you may see that wheat prices are going up for the farmer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the farmer is, from what you're saying, I think, if I understand you correctly, Scott, the farmers are not necessarily cashing in on these steep increases that we're seeing at the grocery store.
Yeah, not at all. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. So, you know, in dairy, for instance, as dairies go more and more towards a corporate model, they're getting more and more of their milk product from large industrial confined animal feeding operations. Mm-hmm. And the smaller operations, 150 head of maybe grass-fed cattle, they're actually getting squeezed out. And in some cases, dairies are refusing to go by and pick up their product anymore. Because why go to 10 different small and mid-sized farms when they can go to one big corporate farm and get all the product that they need?
It strikes me that what you're describing also illustrates the threat the remaining family farmers face. That with these pressures, we're going to see fewer and fewer family farms, which has been the trend throughout really the 20th century, especially the latter half of the 20th century. You know, many of us are remembering the farm crisis of the 1980s and 90s when we lost literally tens of thousands of farms across the country. Families were displaced. Many of them left the agriculture sector. They moved to urban or suburban areas or elsewhere and did other things. And that really didn't seem to help consumers too much, did it?
No, it didn't. And I want to put a little bit of a human face on this as well, because the numbers are one thing. But when you sit down at the table with some of these farmers who are really seeing their balance sheets shrink, their capacity to make a living shrink, and making very hard choices, they don't want to fall into that corporate trap, but they also have fewer and fewer options about where to sell and what price they can sell at. Mm-hmm. And so you see some of these folks who, after decades and multiple generations in their family farm, having to shut down the operation, sometimes sell off the land, and sell off the cattle that they've been working with for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. It's a heartbreaking decision for those folks.
And they have an emotional connection to the land in addition to obviously a financial connection to the success of farming.
Yeah, because farming is not just a job. It is a life. It is a lifestyle. And for a lot of these folks, it's what they've known for a long time. They see and feel the value in it for themselves and for their families. And to lose that is a heartbreaking prospect.
And we should remind folks, they may know this, but it's worth pondering for a moment. We started out, America, the United States started out as primarily an agrarian country. People living on small farms, tending the land, selling the products, subsistence farming, if you will, for a lot of them. And throughout the span of our history, as technology has changed and as corporations grew, that changed to the point where I think I saw a figure once where it said that something like 1% or less of America's population produces the food not only that we consume in a country of, 330 million Americans, but we also are so successful in production that we export food to much of the rest of the world. It's a very small percentage of people engaged in farming, but their impact, not only on the U.S. economy, but the global economy, is really monumental.
Right, and while technology and markets have driven some of these things, what people need to understand is the farming economy we have today is not a market-driven economy. It's an economy driven by federal and state policy. Mm-hmm. It's choices that have been made over the past few decades, particularly in the federal farm bill, that are channeling more and more federal funding resources to those large corporate interests, large commodity-based crops, and away from the kind of farming that I think a lot of people hold in their mind's eye.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that Land Stewardship Project is interested in, from your website I see, is training the next generation of farmers. Yeah. Say a little bit about that, if you will. Are you seeing increasing interest among younger people considering a career in farming?
Yeah, the Beginning Farmer program is one of the oldest ones at Land Stewardship Project. We've been running that for over 30 years now. And every year we get a really powerful group of folks coming together who are thinking about how are they going to get in farming and make a go of it. And we've had a lot of success, both in terms of training people and successfully getting them into a farming occupation and then delivering food for folks.
And so when you say training the next generation of farmers, does that include some training on finances, the economic side of farming, like how do you get farm loans? How do you get crop insurance? How do you buy a piece of land, a parcel, and begin farming if you haven't done it before?
Yeah, we take a very holistic approach. So a lot of people think they're going to come in and they're figuring out how to buy seeds or how to make sure things are fertilized at the right time. But we spend a lot of time talking about what are a person's lifestyle objectives? What do they want to accomplish for themselves? And how do they find that intersection between farming and farming operations and what they actually want to achieve in their lives? Mm-hmm. The other thing that's really interesting about it is we've had other areas of growth based on what we're learning in the Farm Beginnings program. So our land access work deals with a really big problem for new and emerging farmers right now, which is the cost of land. $10,000 to $14,000 an acre for prime farmland right now in Minnesota. And when you're breaking into the field, actually being able to afford just the cost of land as a price of entry is a huge barrier for a lot of folks.
Would I be correct, Scott, if I were to suggest that it's been one of the reasons it's been difficult to keep family farms is because of that acceleration in the value of the land, that the cost of an acre of land has skyrocketed, and therefore the property taxes associated with that go up as well?
Well, there's all sorts of challenging parts of that whole equation, and it does feed into consolidation again, because it's the biggest operators who have the closest connections to corporations that can leverage the capital they have in their existing land to go into debt to buy that 140, 160 acres next door. Mm-hmm. So, and the possibility of somebody coming in new to the farming operation and be able to afford that is mm-hmm. almost negligible.
I have to tell you, my father grew up on a small farm in eastern Nebraska. Yeah. And, that was he was born in 1928 and left the farm when he went into the military in the mid-1940s. But he described what it was like working on the farm. And when he got out of the military and moved to Minnesota in the mid-1950s, he and my mother actually purchased a couple of parcels up land, not to farm it full time, but they just wanted to have a place to go on the weekends. We grew a couple of acres of potatoes, which we didn't sell them. We gave them to our neighborhood family and friends. And there was this connection, which is what I thought of when you
Yeah.
were talking about the emotional connection to farming that doesn't leave people. I think it's kind of a wonder that anybody goes into agriculture when you consider you're at the mercy of the weather. Nowadays, you're at the mercy of climate change, which we're going to talk about a little later. You're at the mercy of what's happening with the markets in terms of the price that you get, the price of fuel, which is a huge cost for farmers, the price of land that you mentioned. It's a wonder anyone does it.
Well, that point of land is wealth. And I think one of the interesting aspects of this is when you're talking about corporate interests, that wealth is all about the bottom line, all about the dollars and cents. But for family farmers, people that have that connection to land, the wealth has a lot of dimensions. It's also about that hands-on connection to a piece of ground. It's that place that they know and love and connect with on a day-to-day basis and work on a day-to-day basis. It's a place where their family is centered, where they raise their kids, where people come back, gather together, and celebrate time together. That sort of multidimensional sense of wealth is not held by corporations. They view it as a commodity to trade and to sell, just like cash in a bank.
Their concern is profits, return on investments for shareholders if they're publicly held companies. That's a whole different set of values, it seems.
Yep.
I want to talk further about climate change.
Yeah.
We're all witnessing this all over the country, all over the world. And how do you see the change in climate affecting the prospects for farmers here in Minnesota? What are some of the changes that are coming down the road as we face this kind of an existential threat for people living on the land and working on the land?
Yeah, I guess I would class the changes in two different types. One, I think the farmers experience on a very tangible and immediate basis is the rapidly shifting weather patterns. We're just coming out of 3 years of significant drought with a surplus of moisture and rain. And both of those have created a lot of challenges for farmers on either end of it. The other aspect that maybe is a little less immediately obvious is policymakers are taking climate change seriously. And despite the ups and downs of whatever political party is in office, the movement to addressing climate change on a policy basis is consistently growing, and the demand is consistently growing. And up till now, a lot of that attention has been on the electricity and the transportation sectors. But agriculture is an increasingly large portion of the climate change impact, and also a huge potential for climate solutions. Corporations understand this, and they're starting to have those conversations with politicians and decision makers that will shape the future of farm policy. We mentioned the Farm Bill earlier and how much it shapes the farms. They're having those conversations now, and intrinsically, their conversations are going to gear towards increased consolidation and greater influence for corporate aspects of the industry. Our interest and our focus is how are we building climate solutions that serve the interests of small and mid-sized farmers and that turn that trajectory of consolidation so that we can actually see a future where there are more small and mid-sized farms on the land that have a more direct connection to consumers.
But doesn't climate change as well create challenges in terms of growing certain crops in Minnesota? The state demographer some time ago noted that he believed, now this summer's an exception, maybe we've had a wet spring and summer, but his prediction was that over the next 50 years, Minnesota's going to be drier, that we're not going to have as much rainfall, albeit not this year, we're seeing something different. And there are implications, aren't there, for what types of crops you can grow when the climate changes, when weather patterns change?
Yeah, absolutely. And some farms are already seeing people shift over and experiment with different crops. Another area where that's developing is, again, those corporate interests are working on new varieties and, and varieties that they own and control that would ostensibly allow us to continue the corn-soybean rotation into the future. But for us, it's really thinking about the resiliency, not just of the cropping systems, but again, also for the economic integrity for those small and mid-sized farmers.
Yes. Let's talk for a moment here about organic food and the push for organic food. Many of us consume organic food. We go to the grocery store. The first thing you're going to notice when you see an item labeled organic is that the price is inevitably higher than products in the store that are not. Yeah. And what are your thoughts about that? Because it seems that organic, healthier foods, foods not made with as many pesticides in the food, you know, the old cliche, you are what you eat. And there seems to be a growing awareness of people toward moving toward organic food. But many working families simply can't do that because of the price difference. Are there ways that you see that that price difference can maybe be moderated, or so that organic product is more accessible to more people?
Yeah, so the organic market definitely has increased costs. In many cases, that yields increased income for families because that organic market looks a lot different than some of the larger commodity and corporate markets. But the thing I think people really, one way to address that cost disparity is for people to, again, think personally about the choices of where that food is coming from and what relationship they have from it. So for instance, if you go to a local farmer's market, a lot of those folks are going to be using very low inputs, reducing use of fertilizers, reducing pesticides. They may not be certified organic, which is a very long, involved, and expensive process. But these are people who are really thinking about the quality of the food that they're selling to folks. So that's a great option for people who want affordable produce, want something that's a little bit healthier, but maybe don't want to go to the grocery store and buy that organic piece.
Right. And we've had guests from Food Shelf on our program, Jason Viana from the Open Door, who told us about a program that the Open Door has where they're actually encouraging the customers at the food shelf to start growing some of their own vegetables in their own yards. And right here in Eagan and in the South Metro suburbs, you can even do this in the city. You see, if you drive around parts of Minneapolis and I think St. Paul too, there are some neighborhood plots where people are maybe growing their own tomatoes or beans. And so, you know, in those situations, they have control over inputs going into what they're growing and leading to something that maybe is affordable too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Another program I'd like to highlight in the state is increased funding and support for farm-to-school programs. So school districts and other institutions are actually building markets where they are reaching out to local farmers who come together as a group and provide orders directly to those schools and institutions. Sorry,
take a drink of water there. We are down to less than 1 minute, Scott, and I just want to point our viewers to your website. If they want to learn more about the issues you and I have been discussing today, they can go to landstewardshipproject.org and learn more about what your great organization is doing, all the things we talked about today and more, and connect with other people who have the same concerns and interests that your organization does and your members do.
Right, and we've got organizing staff throughout the state who would love to connect with people who want to get involved.
That's great, and there's information on how people can connect once they visit the website to email you or give you a call.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. Scott Elkins, Executive Director of the Land Stewardship Project, thank you for being our guest today on Access to Democracy.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.